Hi there. Can you guys hear me? Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited about this film, and I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm very, very excited to introduce Kate Bosworth to talk to you about this amazing film that you just watched. Hi.
Hello, everybody. This is on. Okay, good.
It's on, yes.
Yay.
We're all set.
We're on.
Okay, so most of the people in the audience probably know you primarily as an actor. You are, of course, in this film. We hear your voice from the very beginning, and then we finally see you in the end. But you're also a producer on this film.
Yep.
And I would love to know, we're in a room full of actors, many of whom probably want to produce as well if they haven't already. And so I would love to know, what does producing mean on a project like this? What does it entail? What is your job like? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I paid for it, so that's that instantly gets you a producer credit. Michael Polish is my husband as well, as directing the movie, wrote it, and he also shot it as well. So he was wearing many hats on this feature. And just to back it up a little bit, I'll give a little context to the movie because it will help sort of inform your question. He was driving home from work one day and he was listening to, I think it was NPR or some sort of satellite radio news station, and he had heard about a sex house that was busted not so far from where we lived in Los Angeles, and that in the report it said there was 44 known houses in the LA area, and he just was so kind of like shocked and disturbed by this, and like came home and said, told me about it, and we talked a little bit about human trafficking and sex trafficking. And although we knew what it was generally, we didn't know like a ton about it, to be honest. And as we started talking more, he said, I think that there's a really important narrative story to be told here, in that we're pretty aware, conscious people in the world, and yet we didn't know much about it. And so we thought, well, then, it's something that I think could use some kind of a spotlight for awareness. And so I said I agreed, and we kind of sat around the kitchen table, and he set off to write a feature. And his mother is from Mexico, and his I think in the credits you saw there, the Araiza family, they're all from Mexican descent, and a lot of them still live there. And his mother crossed the border when she was 4, at a time in America it was very welcoming for immigrants. And so Michael is a first generation immigrant, descent, and has had a ton of opportunity here because of that. So there was like the movie had that influence in it, and on a personal level for him. And so in that sense, he said, okay, so I'm writing this script and I really want it to be in Spanish because of his family and that influence, but also his goal with the movie was to really make like the purest form of independent filmmaking with the subject matter as possible. So he said, I want to cast an unknown girl. I want it to be in Spanish. I want to film this in the actual countries and, kind of journey that someone would be taking in this position. So that means he wanted to start in San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which is known then, and I think it still is, but it was coined at that time, about 2 years ago when he set out to make this movie, as the murder capital of the world. He wanted to then kind of travel through Guatemala in different ways. You saw them on the top of the bus, and he wanted to film in sort of this train called La Bestia, which is like incredibly dangerous, and like there aren't any train times even because the cartel watches it so much. Just a lot of danger behind the shoot. And he'd make his way through Mexico and then cross the border to Tijuana. And I said, oh, so that'll be easy to find financing. And I just taking them off, like and then you're just raising the budget, exponentially, just in terms of a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration. And so I said, well, we'll write it and we'll see where we're at. And he wrote it. And I said, okay, well, Michael, he's a real kind of magician when it comes to independent filmmaking. He literally wrote the book on it. I don't know if anyone's read it, but he wrote a book on how to make independent movies. I really highly suggest it. It's great. I think it's literally called How to Make an Independent Movie, or The Art of Making Independent Movies. He wrote it quite a few years ago. But anyway, I said to him, so you're shooting this, you know, and he's quite precise, if not, he'll come under budget often.
Wow.
He's that kind of creator. And I said, so what do you think the budget is on this? And he told me, and I said, okay. I said, well, you know what? I said, if that's the budget and that's what it is, then let's do it, And we I remember when we really were kind of coming to the real decision, we're buying plane tickets, we're we're putting down the credit cards. I remember we were sitting at a bar and we both just we're both whiskey drinkers, and we had a shot of whiskey, and we were just here we go,
Yeah.
sort of that was the sort of beginning of Nona. And so in answer to your question, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but in answer to it, it was yes, as I'm joking, but I'm kind of serious. The executive producer credit was because I paid for it, and we separated our role. We met with very sort of distinguished roles. We met on a movie called Big Sur, where I was an actress in it, and he was the writer and director, and we met and knew and had an enormous amount of respect for what the other did, but kind of we're in our own lanes, and we kind of love that about what we do.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I get asked the question, is it really difficult to work with your husband, or to have that kind of dynamic in a marriage? And it's really not. I mean, I there's not enough time in this life for me to work with him, really. That's how much we just adore it. But this one in particular, I was I will produce this with you and for you, and you can be on the ground and just sort of paint your picture. And so I was in LA. It was too high risk for me to be in that part of the world.
Yeah.
He took a crew of about 9 or 10 people and did the journey that I told you about. But I was in LA and was booking, plane tickets and hotel rooms, and things would happen. I mean, there's so much corruption in that part of the world that I would literally have, paid for the plane tickets, paid for the hotel rooms, and then Michael would call me and say the hotel rooms aren't paid for. And I'm no, they are. And they're saying they're not. I'm they are. I see it. I see it's not in my bank account. I know they took it. Well, they're not. And I said, well, pay for it again, and I'll have to call fraud on it with a credit card later. And I remember calling the credit card company and saying, this is going to sound very strange, but I'm going to tell you that from here until about 3 weeks, there's going to be a lot of fraud on the card. And they were kind of
People don't usually give us a heads up.
No,
about that.
they really were. I was I said, my husband is traveling. I can't pull, the funds or the credit, but you have to just and they kind of weirdly were okay, I guess it was just where he was shooting.
Yeah.
And so a lot of post for me was this mass cleanup financially, where it was I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the great thing about making a movie, whether you're paying for it or whether you're really producing it and you're on the ground, is that it kind of as an actor and working on so many productions as just an actor, there's this kind of whole mystical side of production where you're oh, someone else is, pulling the strings, and I just come and sort of say the lines, and I, embody a character, but then there's this whole other side that everyone else does, and then you do it and you're oh, you just do it. There's no mystical sort of it's
Right.
you're just you're doing it,
Right.
and it's a grind, and it's and you're connecting the dots, and so much shit goes wrong, and you're just okay, well, I gotta manage that, I gotta plug that hole, gotta find a solution there, and so it's a lot of problem solving and a lot of sort of focus on one foot in front of the other, and what's absolutely critical right this moment comparative to looking too far ahead.
Right. Because if you don't have that hotel room, then your crew has nowhere to stay.
Exactly. So you're this is right now, this is happening, and a lot of it for me was managing security as well. We sent the group with an ex-Navy SEAL who was recommended to me from someone else, because I said, and honestly, most of the money really did go to security, whereas armored vehicles, armed guards, And like I would have the ex-Navy SEAL call me and say, look, we're in a part, like I've done an assessment, like we need an extra 2 guards and you know, they need to be armed and we need to get one more vehicle. And like, you know, it's not the type of thing you're gonna go, you sure? You know what I mean? Like you're like, okay, that's what we're doing. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, so yes, I know it's a long-winded answer, but this one in particular was like a lot of producerial efforts, you know, in many different capacities for sure.
And you're going to keep doing, so you have a Netflix series coming up, The Island. You're going to, is it The Island or is it The Island? Or
It's
is
just
it,
Island.
we don't know.
Yeah, it's I-land,
Island. Okay.
Yep.
So you're starring in that and also producing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there, not that you need to have a favorite, but do you enjoy the problem solvingness of the producerial role? Do you, or are they like, do you love doing both equally?
Taking on a producerial role has been quite a natural fit for me because, so this is sort of like how Michael and I differ a little bit too, although he's a really incredible producer. But when he's directing, it's like, and he'll self-admittedly say this, it's like, he's like in the zone. It's like one highway. He's like, I have to just look at this all the time. I can't think of what's over there. It's just got to be this. Whereas my brain functions quite well with like this, that, no, you know. I probably have a little OCD, which works well for being a producer. Yeah. So it was a natural fit for just not honestly like what I do in my life anyway. But for the Netflix show, I'm actually leaving Sunday. I have to shoot like one more day. I landed this is so weird. I landed yesterday from this Dominican Republic where we're shooting it. I was shooting it for like 2.5 months. And the show sort of takes place in this kind of like deserted island type feel. And like we're in super rural kind of deserted places in the Dominican Republic. And like it gets weird because you're like with your cast and your crew and you like really don't see anyone else. Yeah. And you're just like, you're just in it. Like it's almost like a.
And now you're in Manhattan.
I know. I landed here and I was like, oh my God. I was like sensory overload, like culture shock. And also like doing the, you know, like you're on a talk show and you're like, this is crazy. You know, it's like surreal.
You need like a spa day or something.
I took one.
Think. Yeah.
No, I did.
Good. Okay.
I landed and I was like, I need to like have some sort of like cocooned sort of reentry. But the Netflix show, what differs a little bit about the two is that the Neil LaBute created and wrote with a few other writers Island, and so he's the showrunner and the writer and creator of the show. And I've known Neil a long time, and he's such a great man, and obviously like a really brilliant writer and creator. And we'd been looking for something to do for a while, and he called me up and said, "Oh, I have this idea, this concept," and he kind of laid it out for me. And then I came on, as a part of the show and as producing it. So it had already been sort of like developed and cooked, whereas like Nona was like literally from like a seedling concept, you know, whereas like let's flesh that out. So it's just, I suppose it's about like at what time do you get on the train? You know what I mean? Is it like you leaving the station and, you know, or is it like you're on like the 6th or 7th stop and like how can you be useful in that sense? And so with the Island, they had all the sort of like pieces in place, you know, like obviously like location people were saying that was already taken. There's a line producer, things like that were taken care of, which I was doing on Nona, which is probably a little bit, you know, unorthodox for most actors, but you have to do it. Yeah. And so Island was a lot of sort of more of like a creative producerial role, which was like looking at overall strokes of the show and talking to Neil about it and Chad Oakes, who it's a co-production with Nomadic Pictures, who did like Fargo and Van Helsing and like some really great shows, Canadian production company. So we would sit and like really talk about like the more of the creative broad strokes. And then definitely like for my character, it's a really like, she's a crazy character. It was really fun to play, but like really just kind of able to develop that in a way that, I don't know, you guys know as actors, like you feel like you have a responsibility to embody someone, but I always felt a little bit like for a lot of my career, and I think maybe it's because I fell into this accidentally, but I always felt like I always had to like ask permission in a way sometimes of like, is this what you want? Am I doing this okay? Like, do you want something different? Like, da da da. Rather than just being like, this is like what it is. Like, this is who she is, and like, this is what she's wearing. And it's not to say you can't be collaborative, but for some reason, like maybe it's just coming into my own as well in my 30s, but like having more of a seat at the table and more of a like a you know a more maybe like a more significant you know, voice in terms of how I would like a story to be told, or how I would like to participate in it, or how that voice is sounding. You know, it's different things, but in different sizes of things. Obviously, Nona budget is different than Island, but and I'm not paying for it, thank God.
Right.
But
that's amazing.
Leave that to Netflix.
Something you earn, you know.
Yeah,
that
it is something you earn.
You've been working. How old were you when you shot The Horse Whisperer?
I was 14. Yeah, so I've been doing this for like 21 years. Yeah, and you're right. It's like I finally figured it out in the second decade, guys.
Good.
Like that's all. Just hang
Better
on.
late than never.
Yeah, just hang on, and you'll like figure it out. Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And actually, that something I'd like to that kind of relates to everything we've been talking about. You know, number one, how long you've been a working actor in this industry. Kind of finding your seat at the table and your voice and kind of claiming your power. And also, this film is very much about kind of what women go through and this kind of side of the world that many of us are very lucky not to know very closely. And I'm wondering, you know, when you put all those things together, just obviously we're at a very kind of important time right now, especially with, you know, what's going on in the Me Too movement and Time's Up and all of that. And I'm just wondering how you feel about kind of what's happening right now in the industry and kind of where you'd like to see things go next.
I think it's a very exciting time, you know. I mean, you know, to be able to, I feel like these conversations were being had somewhat behind closed doors. Like, you know, I remember meeting with a writer, you know, a female writer, and you know, just at some point it would come out where she was like, man, like I'm just so sick of being in this room, and so like grabs my bra strap and like snaps it back, and I'm like, really? I'm like, you know, it's like, and it's just weird shit, you know. I mean, it's like, first of all, this industry sort of attracts a lot of weird people anyway, but it does. I mean, it's great to be weird and different. I always say that. I'm like, I love being weird. I'm weird, but unique, but eccentric. But you know, but then also it's sort of it's this kind of dangly, shiny lure, which can be a dark thing too for people, where they're like, oh, I want to go and be, you know, in Hollywood and like do, you know, nefarious things and be gross, and you know, that exists too. So I think, you know, I personally hadn't experienced like, you know, something that was, you know, as upsetting as a lot of women. I had like those little things, like, you know, asking for my skirts to be shorter, and I was like, but my character is like a librarian. Like, what do you mean? Like, you know what I mean? And like, I was like, in like long, like, can you just like wear it? Like, we just need it like sexier. I'm like, that's not the character though. Like, so 'cause I always go back to character, like always. It's not about, like, it's just about being honest to like who it is I'm playing. You know, I don't care about wearing a short skirt. I like wearing short skirts, but it's like, does it make sense for like who this woman is? Do you know what I mean? And so when you become like objectified in a way, it's like, actually, we don't give a shit about your character. We don't care about you. We just want you to look really hot. Then you're like, oh, great. Like, that's like a great, you know, headspace to be in. It's just a little demeaning. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of those examples that I can cite. And so I think that like to be able to have conversations more openly and to have people go, yeah, you know what, actually that's not right, and you know, we should be able to, you know, rectify that, and, you know, pay more attention to that. I think it's only going to make better art, better characters, more truthful, more authentic, and more valid, you know, for people. Yeah.
Well, we're unfortunately almost out of time, so I would love to wrap up, because we're in a room full of actors, by asking you what words of wisdom or advice you would give them. And it can also be, if you want, for actors who want to cross over to producing.
I mean, you gotta love it. You know, I mean, that's the that's the first thing I think is just like to really, really be in love with whatever it is that you want to do. You know, whether it's writing, directing, acting, producing. Like it's, you know, I don't mean this in like a you know, like a, I don't want it like in a deterring way, but it's sort of like you have to want it more than someone else not wanting you there. You know what I mean? Because most of the time, like you come to Hollywood and like, or whatever, you want to go be in something and people are kind of like, yeah, we don't really want you here. And you have to be like, but I want to fucking be here. Like I deserve to be here. I love this. I want to be here. I'm going to be here. I don't care what you say. I'm doing it. And so you have to really love it. And, you know, if I would say that there's, you know, one word to sort of crystallize what's helped me in my career and what I think really is a key component is perseverance. And, you know, I always say be a great D student, which is like dedication, desire, drive, discipline. Discipline's a big one. I mean, you know, there's so many roles that everyone said like no, and I sort of turned that no into a yes somehow because of dedication and perseverance and pure discipline of you know, for Blue Crush, for example, like there's so many no's on that because I had never touched a surfboard. So like understandably they were like, yeah, well, thank you. That means I did my job good. But so many, you know, understandably they were like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like there's a prerequisite for like having to know how to surf for this movie. And I was like, okay, well then I'll just go learn to surf. And so like went to the Yellow Pages, like found a,
Oh my God.
you know, a surf instructor in Malibu. And I called him up and I was like, I've got to learn to surf in 3 weeks because they're like, you know, reading people. And like they said they were going to give it a 3-week thing. And I was like, I have to learn. So I said to him, like, what will that take? And he's like, I mean, like 6-7 hours every day, like 7 days a week. And I was like, I'm in. And so I did that. And then like called up the producers and said, I would really love the opportunity to surf for you. And they were like, okay. And I was awful. I was so bad. I went out with like a neutral surf instructor and oh man, I just kept falling and just eating shit and just like being like, oh God. I'm really not doing very well here. And I thanked everyone for the opportunity, sort of with my tail between my legs. And then I was told later that the producers asked the surf instructor sort of like, well, what do you think? Because like, remember, you know, I'd never been a lead in a movie. I didn't know how to surf. I mean, there's so many things against me. And the producer said to the surf instructor, like, well, what do you think? And they said, I don't think you'll meet anyone who's more determined. And that was really what won me the role. And it's, you know, so, you know, I mean, you gotta have that like crazy love and sort of dedication to it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that's like your movie. That's the like Blue Crush without you. It's like, that's amazing. So thank you for that. Thank you all for joining us. Tell your friends to see Nona. It opens in New York tomorrow. Have a good day.
Thank you for being here. I just like to say that like this is such a sincere labor of love for Michael and myself, and like just for you to be here and watching it and like supporting it in the way that you have is like means so much to us, like truly. So thank you.